Synesthesia is a mixture of the senses that affected persons have from birth, where, for example, that which they hear they can simultaneously see, either in colors or shapes that move around them. There are also forms of synesthesia where a color is paired with a smell or taste. Essentially, synesthesia is the ability to perceive the world in a multidimensional way. The sounds that one hears are not just an acoustic stimulus, but may also trigger many other kinds of perceptions.
Das, was man hört, gleichzeitig noch ganz viele andere Wahrnehmungen auslösen kann.
Synesthesia cannot be acquired. It is a phenomenon that is generally inherited and one that a person has from birth onward. It isn't something you can learn or acquire. Synesthesia is there, and then you have it. It usually stays with a person for their entire life. That's quite typical for synesthesia, but should not be confused with, for example, a mixing of the senses caused by consuming drugs or other substances, or if one is unfortunate as a result of brain damage. The phenomena of synesthesia itself cannot be acquired or learned. However, what you can do is learn from synesthesia, or rather, the people that have synesthesia. What exactly is it? What advantages does synesthesia grant those people who have it? And I have to say that from my own experience, working together with so many synesthetes has given me a lot of insights. Enough to say that we can learn from synesthesia, which is also part of the reason that we are doing research on it. We can also find out what synesthetes or people affected by synesthesia have that some others don't have. What advantages does synesthesia give them that might help them with certain things or in certain areas of life? For example, we assume that synesthetes have a more stable psyche or more stable mental situation, but we don't know what causes this. I know a lot of synesthetes, maybe about 1,000 people that I met through research work, but really, very few of these synesthetes have any kind of psychological problems or even mental illness. Based on this, we could conclude that synesthesia somehow provides a certain protective element that quite possibly allows these people to more easily or more safely deal with particular challenges they might face in life.
Einfacher oder sicherer hindurchkommt.
Initially, many people thought that synesthesia was something made up, that it's an illusion, a fragment of a person's imagination. Aren't these just hallucinations that these people are having? So, it was only natural that it was naturally our task to prove that synesthesia does in fact exist. And this was first done with the help of imaging techniques, such as positron emission tomography. These were the first studies ever performed. These are tests that allow us to monitor the brain while it's thinking or feeling by making metabolic processes visible. Various types of functional tomography, such as positron emission tomography, PET for short, or as of late, the more popular nuclear magnetic resonance imaging, also known as MRIs, allow us to see where, or rather in which brain regions the most metabolic reactions are occurring at a particular moment. In this way, you can see exactly what happens when a synesthete, who is currently being tested in the tomography, presses a button and says, "Now I see what I am hearing." You can see that the synesthete not only has activity in the auditory center, but also in the visual center. So we are able to monitor and examine synesthesia using, for example, tomography or functional tomography to see that the respective areas of the brain are activated corresponding to the synesthetic perceptions occurring in that moment. This means that when someone hears something and simultaneously sees a color, we are able to observe with tomography confirming that this person is actually seeing a color and not just imagining it. About 20 years ago, we assumed that maybe 1 in a million or 1 in 100,000 people had synesthesia, and that it was such a rare and brilliant phenomenon. Meanwhile, we know that synesthesia actually affects at least 1 in 20 people, and we come to a 5% rate of frequency. This percentage comes from the research of a colleague, Julius Simner, who tested 1,000 museum visitors in London. Each person who visited the museum was given the opportunity to take a test, but didn't know what exactly it was for. Of these 1,000 museum visitors, 5% of them were synesthetes. This is one measure or study that provides us with scientific proof. This is similar to what we experience when we give lectures on synesthesia. For example, if there are 100 people in the audience, then we can assume that 3 or 4 people will approach us afterwards and say that they now understand that they also have synesthesia and could relate to the lecture topics. This is how we arrive at the statistic that approximately 5% of people have synesthesia. It could be more, but it's always a matter of whether people would like to out themselves and admit that they also perceive things in this way, and that they experience a mixing of the senses. But sometimes it might be better not to do so. The problem is a lack of information about synesthesia. In fact, a major issue is that many people know very little about synesthesia. This ranges from parents raising children to teachers, educators, and even the psychiatrists that synesthetes sometimes are sent to, even though synesthesia is not an illness at all. It's rather a matter of accepting one's otherness and that one has a way of life that is different from the majority of other people.
Von dem großen anderen Teil der Menschen unterscheidet. Synästhesie bringt eher Vorteile.
Synesthesia rather brings advantages for those affected and is in no way whatsoever an illness. But this is unfortunately little known. And so many people come to see me, parents who bring their children. This is not altogether uncommon. Some of which have meanwhile read a considerable amount about synesthesia online, or have spoken with neighbors or teachers that don't understand much about it. And of course, one might initially believe the child is mentally ill when they say the number 1 is green and 2 is red. And if you add them together, the answer cannot be blue. These are the typical initial difficulties for synesthetes in school subjects. This mixing of the senses often brings about special experiences. For example, in mathematics, where the arithmetical exercises are colorful. Some colors might fit well together, while others clash. In terms of learning, or especially in school, synesthesia is particularly challenging.
So farbig sind, dass Farben passen können oder nicht passen können. Also die Synästhesie stellt im Lernen und insbesondere in der Schule eine besondere Herausforderung dar. Aufpassen muss man allerdings.
However, one has to avoid being dragged to a psychiatrist who might diagnose you with impaired cognition or other disorders. One might come to this conclusion because things are being mixed that do not belong together. They might be unfamiliar with this, and if a person is unlucky, they will be prescribed medications for illnesses that have nothing to do with synesthesia. For example, medications for schizophrenia or other forms of psychosis, sometimes even for disabilities, such as learning disabilities. It can be dangerous when a child is labeled as being mentally ill, disabled, or different. This is a difficult problem when you are growing up and are currently preoccupied with figuring out who you really are, where you belong, which group you belong to, what place you belong to, where you feel at home. When something then happens that a teacher might not understand, you can't really blame them, but maybe a teacher who doesn't really understand anything about what you are experiencing then says that you have a serious mental illness, which happens quite often, and must be treated for it. That's when we have a problem, because it is not a mental illness at all. This hinders a child's development and can thus actually cause them to become ill. Normally, synesthesia is an advantage, and anyone who has it can be glad that they have it. but it can become problematic if it is misunderstood or incorrectly diagnosed, because this condition doesn't warrant a diagnosis at all. These people are bent until they fit the mold and then attributed with a mental illness. It's instances like these that demand that more awareness about synesthesia should be raised. Parents can tell if their children have synesthesia when it seems quite self-evident that a number has a particular color. The number 7 is green. The number 4 is red. Letters of the alphabet have specific colors. These are the typical signs that allow parents to determine if their child has synesthesia. There is no doubt here, because why would a child lie and invent something? This is something I have rarely experienced. Generally, that's just the way it is. However, it is also possible that it is still a remnant of what happens very early in childhood when the entire brain is occupied with perceiving stimuli in one sensory quality. What I mean by this is that in early childhood, the visual center does not only see and the auditory center does not only hear, but rather all areas of the brain are occupied with processing a sensory stimulus in order to make sense of it. It could also be that when I notice my child perceives letters of the alphabet in color, or numbers might have colors, so that when you add these figures together, the colors don't go together, which results in other colors. Here, children sometimes ask why something is the way it is, or if this is even correct. It is possible that it is just a remnant from early childhood, but then disappears at the latest with 10, 11, or 12 years of age. However, usually if the parents realize that their child has these perceptions, a form of synesthesia has already manifested and is noticeable at the age of, or is frequently noticeable between 7 and 10 years of age. This can undoubtedly be synesthesia that a child is experiencing when they explain what they see, hear, or perceive.
Das Kind erzählt von seiner Synästhesie. Es können aber auch ganz andere Dinge sein.
On the other hand, it could also be completely different things that become apparent, namely that the child is especially sensitive, perceives things in a multi-layered way, or is not completely concentrated when playing with a toy. Yes, maybe they are a bit more advanced in certain topics than others are, or quickly switch from one topic to the next. Maybe they are well associated and have intuition relatively early, or think and speak a lot. It could also be that certain phenomena characteristic of gifted children become apparent too, where you might ask if their weekdays also have colors, or how they perceive a certain fragrance or taste. In most cases, however, the parents become worried when their children say that numbers have colors, and when these are added together, the result is a different color. Or when a teacher explains something and the child should give their impression of this, or of a story that they were told. Imagine a synesthete, maybe about 10 years old, giving his impression and explaining that when the teacher told the story, he saw red triangles flying by, and there were blue circles that moved from the upper left to the upper right. This is where a teacher might get stuck if they haven't ever heard of synesthesia. They would most likely speak to the child's parents about the child's behavior, and that's when things begin to cascade. Then a psychiatrist is sought out, or they'll speak with someone who has synesthesia, or at least understands it. I have always very much enjoyed working together with synesthetes, and always tried to find out what exactly it is that makes these people so pleasant. What is it that makes people want to be around them so much? This empathy of the synesthetes, which is at times a bit overwhelming for them, and a reason why they might need a half hour for themselves to maybe go for a walk and unwind for a while, is also something that accounts for this cordialness and what makes working together with synesthetes so wonderful.